Okay, I guess when you're wrong, and I must admit I was horribly wrong about GNOME on touchscreens. In my previous video, I kinda blasted GNOME for being barely usable on touchscreens, because, well, that was my experience with the GNOME I tried. Turns out I didn't go deep enough, because this was all Ubuntu's fault. Yeah, turns out using one of the most reviled distros out there to test GNOME was not a good solution. So I gave another go at GNOME, but this time on Fedora, and things were very different. And I also took the opportunity to look at Plasma Mobile and at Phosh while I was at it, so we had a solid roundup of touch experiences. So let's take a look at those three desktops, this time correctly, and also it's sponsor time now. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. They offer solutions that allow you to spend less time patching and maintaining the security of your system, thanks to rebootless live patching for your kernel, critical system libraries, and virtual machines. They also offer solutions to let you take as much time as you need to complete your migrations to newer versions of Linux distributions or development frameworks and languages, thanks to their endless lifecycle support solutions that give you ongoing security updates for years past the end-of-life date. And this week they're giving you free access to the Enterprise Leader's Guide to Cybersecurity Resilience. It's a simple guide to understand how the traditional approach to patching Linux kernels and systems is disrupting your business and how rebootless patching can help by eliminating the need to reboot after updates, meaning you don't have to plan maintenance windows anymore, you don't have planned downtime, and you don't have potential disruptions. It's a guide about avoiding IT strain and cutting costs with the most advanced patching technology on the market, which is also affordable enough for organizations of all sizes to implement. You can get the guide for free by clicking the link in the description of the video without paying anything or giving anybody any personal info, no name, phone or email address. It's just purely free. Okay, so let's take another look at GNOME, but this time on Fedora with a very vanilla GNOME install of GNOME 47. I only applied all the updates and added the Tuxedo drivers repo because it's a Tuxedo device I'm using, just to make sure everything was in there that was needed. And after a reboot, I must say I was shocked. A lot of you mentioned in the comments of the previous video that you did not experience most of the issues that I faced. And it turns out all these issues seem to be Ubuntu's fault. On Fedora, tiling windows by dragging them to the edge of the screen works normally. On Ubuntu, it simply didn't. And that's likely to Ubuntu's own tiling extension that they added that just doesn't work well with touch, I guess. I also could long press on elements on the desktop or inside of applications, and I got a stable right-click context menu that you get by long pressing, for example, the folder, that did not disappear after I lifted my finger. Again, something that did not work inside Ubuntu even with all the drivers installed. Now, to be noted, it also didn't work when I was in the installer of Fedora, but after installing the Tuxedo drivers, it did work. I had installed those same drivers on Ubuntu though, and it didn't work in Ubuntu, so I'm not sure what the problem was exactly here. I could also open menu bars inside of applications that have them. They are absolutely horrendous to use on GNOME as well, because, well, for touch, menu bars are maybe the worst paradigm possible, but they did open the menus and they stayed open. There was some fiddly stuff where sometimes I had to touch things twice, but it did work even inside of KDE applications, which again did not work on Ubuntu. What did not work though was the on-screen keyboard inside of KDE apps. Touching a text field does not bring the GNOME keyboard up, which sucks. This was not an Ubuntu specific problem, it is a GNOME on-screen keyboard issue. Speaking of which, that GNOME keyboard is better sized than KDE's, but as some of you remarked on in the previous video, this on-screen keyboard does not support modifier keys, meaning you can't really trigger keyboard shortcuts with it, and you can't use the terminal and many terminal apps adequately. I could not find an option to fix that. The GNOME keyboard also doesn't have an emoji board baked in, unlike KDE's keyboard. It's not like it's a crucial thing, but since you have a virtual keyboard and GNOME has an emoji picker, you could expect that to also exist here. It's just convenient. Another thing that did not work on Ubuntu but did work in Fedora is swiping on the app grid anywhere. On Ubuntu, I had to aim between icons. On Fedora, I could just swipe and make things move. I also did not experience the touchscreen freeze bug that Ubuntu seemed to exhibit sometimes, where touch would just stop working, then the application would crash, and things would then get back to normal. So yeah, I have to admit that when I made the original video, I really did not expect the 3 extensions Ubuntu adds on top of GNOME, and that's about it, to mess up touchscreen experience like that. I should have anticipated it and used a more vanilla version. Turns out GNOME on touchscreens is actually really good. I still personally prefer KDE to it, because I think you have more options to tweak everything. You have a single click to open folders, stuff like that. I think it's better designed for touch, but GNOME is definitely a very good experience. The keyboard is both better and worse than in KDE, but once you can get all the tiling, all the long press menus and stuff like that, it's just a good experience. And yeah, definitely anyone can use default vanilla GNOME. Just do not use Ubuntu's version, because it's broken on touchscreen. They probably just don't test for this kind of form factor. Now let's move on to Plasma Mobile. For this one, I used Fedora's Plasma Mobile Spin, and it's a very good experience. You basically have a simple app grid by default, with mobile optimized applications pre-installed. They all open full screen, and you have an Android-like button row at the bottom to handle all the navigation. You have a square to open a list of all installed apps, and you can swipe any app up to dismiss it and close it. You have the Plasma logo to go back to the app grid, and you've got the close button / fold keyboard button, which does what it says on the tin. There are some issues with that button row, specifically because there is a gesture you can start from the bottom screen edge, and sometimes when you're tapping a button, you sort of trigger that gesture for the briefest moment, so things move around, but your button tap doesn't seem to register. It helps to aim a bit higher than you would do normally to avoid triggering that gesture. Swiping from the top edge opens quick settings that let you access a lot of the settings that you'd need. It is great, apart from the scrolling text inside each of those quick settings, because it makes it look very busy. I guess it's aimed more at smartphones, and it doesn't resize that well on bigger devices. That's also the main issue I have with Plasma Mobile. It is clearly not meant for big displays. It works on them surprisingly well, but you have to use everything full screen, so it's not necessarily for everyone. Of course, that is subjective, and some people will like that kind of experience on a 14-inch screen, and some people will want a bit more flexibility and floating windows. Now, default apps are perfectly optimized for touch. They have clear interfaces, they are very easy to use and navigate, they have big buttons. It's nice. Opening full-size desktop applications also works well. Menu bars are resized and enlarged, even the menu themselves, although for large menus it makes it a bit annoying to navigate. It's still a very pleasant experience as a whole, except for the on-screen keyboard mallet, which is the same that I used on KDE. It's still way too big. It still doesn't have any graphical config options, but it does offer modifier keys. When inside the terminal, you have that nice little row with arrow keys and all the modifiers like Control, Shift, and whatever, meaning it's actually useful for that, so that's nice. The keyboard does not follow the dark mode though, at least not automatically, so that's less nice. Plasma Mobile also gives you access to a lot of KDE settings, at least the ones that are relevant, so you do have most of the power of KDE, but in a more touch-friendly experience. So basically, if your touchscreen device is a tablet, or is going to be used 99% of the time in touch mode as a tablet, Plasma Mobile is actually not a bad thing. You can get it pre-packaged in Fedora's Plasma Mobile Spin. It works really nicely. You don't have anything really to do for it to be touch optimized. For a 2-in-1 that is mostly a laptop and sometimes turned into a tablet, I would still go with regular KDE or with GNOME, but for anything that is mostly going to be touch-based, then sure, I think Plasma Mobile is a very good option. Now what about Phosh? So Phosh is some kind of fork of the GNOME shell made by Purism for their Librem 5 phone, but it does work on any other device. You can install it on Fedora straight from its repos, so that's what I did, and I could just pick it as an option from the login manager in Fedora. I won't go over it for too long because it is very clear that it is not meant for landscape displays, for laptops and big screens. It is really meant for smartphones. And it is also basically just the GNOME shell with very few small adaptations. So you start in it in an app grid, but that app grid for a big display is worse than GNOME's default grid. There is less padding, the background isn't blurred or darkened, so it's less legible. These applications also do not open full screen, so you can still tile them, which is very nice, and they're mostly all just the default GNOME apps in there. I guess it's up to the distro that ships Phosh to also ship mobile-specific apps, although in the app grid of Phosh you do have a filter to only display mobile-friendly applications. After that, swiping from the top edge of the screen brings the notifications and the quick settings that occupy the entire screen, which is completely unnecessary on a big screen like on this laptop, but it is very coherent for a smartphone. These toggles can be expanded and configured using the mobile settings app that Phosh comes with, which also has a bunch more options in there. Although I do feel like GNOME's default quick settings are just better than Phosh's quick settings because they don't obscure the entire screen and they're more touch friendly, they're a bit bigger, there's more padding, and they're just nicer to use. Now generally using Phosh is just like using GNOME on Fedora, but it's really meant for smartphones. Even the on-screen keyboard is clearly not suited for large landscape screens. It is super tiny and it is much worse than the default GNOME keyboard, except it does offer terminal-based options for modifier keys and an emoji board, which is good. But sizing just doesn't work, it's just way too small. As a whole, Phosh is just not meant for this kind of device. You can install it and use it if that's your cup of tea, but I would just use the default GNOME version that has more power and also in some ways is just better optimized for touch, at least on big landscape 2-in-1s or big solid tablets. Now, Phosh also feels outdated in some areas where you long press an application and you get a menu that is straight out of GTK 3, and sometimes you have stuff that you need to drag and drop and that just doesn't work all that well. So I would honestly, on this kind of big screen device, stick to GNOME and not go to Phosh instead. So let's conclude on touchscreens. First, mea maxima culpa to the GNOME project. GNOME is indeed very, very good on touchscreens. It is just that Ubuntu destroys its touch capabilities with some changes that they make to GNOME. Not sure if they patch the compositor or if they just add their own extensions that break everything, but it just doesn't work well on Ubuntu compared to regular vanilla GNOME. Second, Plasma Mobile is really nice, even on a 2-in-1 device, although I still personally prefer the regular KDE Plasma for that form factor. Plasma Mobile is still excellent for tablets and presumably for phones if they can manage to run that desktop as competently and as smoothly as the laptop I used does. Finally, Phosh is, in my opinion, unsuitable for this form factor. It is just worse than the default vanilla GNOME. It looks okay for smartphones, but for 2-in-1s it's just not the right choice. So that's gonna be it for touchscreen related stuff. I probably won't revisit this topic anytime soon because it really doesn't feel like you're that interested in it, judging from the number of views on the previous video, and I'm assuming this one also doesn't perform all too well for the channel, so I'm just going to stop talking about these things here. The next time I'll try them out, it might be on maybe tablet hardware if any manufacturer sends that to me, or maybe revisiting Linux smartphones instead, because that seems to gather a bit more interest than just basic 2-in-1 laptops and displays. Anyway, thank you all for watching and or listening. Again, sorry for not going deeper into why GNOME didn't work right in the first video. Hopefully this clarifies things and fixes it. Thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one very soon. Bye!